My name is Darcy. I currently live in a single-family home with my husband Carlos and our daughter Nikki. Carlos and I met back in college and we instantly clicked. I was in the design department and he was studying law. We happened to be in the same club. After graduating, I took a job at a design firm and was doing what I loved. Carlos and I dated for a few years and got married in our early 20s. I continued to work during my early pregnancy, but once Nikki was born, I decided to focus on raising her. Carlos and others encouraged me to prioritize parenting, so now I work from home. By the way, Carlos passed the bar exam after college and is now working as a lawyer. Mommy, I'm going to play with my friends. Be back before it gets dark. Okay. Life's pretty amazing, living with a loving husband and an adorable daughter while doing the design work I love. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. I was out shopping a bit far from home when I saw my mother-in-law, Christine, struggling with some heavy bags. I couldn't help but approach her. Mother-in-law! Oh, Darcy, what a coincidence! Christine smiled warmly at me. Since it had been a while, I felt happy to see her and suggested, how about some tea? I'd love to, but I'm in a hurry. Oh, I see. My apologies. It's fine. Let's catch up over tea next time. Then let me at least help you get these bags home. They look really heavy. After some convincing, I loaded her bags into the back seat of my car. They were pretty heavy, and carrying two of them seemed like a task. Christine said, I'm sorry and thank you, with a smile, so I felt reassured that being a bit assertive was okay. Plus, there was something I had been wanting to talk to her about. We chatted about this and that as I drove her home. It takes about 3 hours and 30 minutes to drive to our in-laws' place, so we can't visit frequently. However, we do make it a point to visit for New Year's celebrations, so I know the way. Weren't you struggling carrying all this by yourself? I decided to ask about something that had been bothering me on the way. In one of the bags my mother-in-law was carrying, there were groceries. In the other, there were daily necessities and cosmetics. Items clearly geared toward a younger demographic rather than what she typically used. Well, they're essentials. I ended up buying a lot. Her expression seemed a bit down. I didn't pry any further and drove us to her home. Darcy, thank you so much. You've been a huge help. This is far enough. I can take the bags to the entrance. Oh, you don't have to. When my mother-in-law opened the door, I placed the bags at the entrance. Just then, I heard a harsh voice. Finally, you're back. What took so long, mother-in-law? The voice belonged to my sister-in-law, Katie. She seemed surprised to see me, and her words trailed off. I was equally surprised to see Katie and found myself frozen in place. My mother-in-law looked flustered as she assessed the situation. Sister-in-law, long time no see. How have you been? Fine. It's been a while for you too, Katie. Saying that, I returned a smile to Katie. I hold back a sigh as I look at her. She clearly looks like she's just woken up. She is holding her mobile phone in one hand. Her incomplete sentence alone was enough to raise suspicions. I'm sorry for the sudden visit. I happened to see mother-in-law while I was shopping nearby. She looked like she was struggling with the bags, so I came along. I see. I just got back from work this morning. I'm a mess. Sorry. Thank you for helping mother-in-law. I'll take it from here. Katie quickly grabbed the bags and took them inside. In a soft voice, I asked mother-in-law, Is everything all right living with Katie and the family? Mother-in-law simply smiled and nodded. Thanks for your concern, Darcy. I'm fine. Sorry I can't even offer you tea. No worries. It was nice to catch up. I'll visit again. Without pressing mother-in-law further, I left. Still, I couldn't simply ignore the situation I just witnessed. Originally, mother-in-law was supposed to live with us, but after father-in-law passed away over a decade ago, my brother-in-law Brett said, We'll live in the family home and take care of Mom. Even Carlos, my husband, was initially concerned. I felt uneasy about the situation, so I initiated a discussion, but it didn't go well. Carlos is busy with work, right? And he has irregular days off. I work close by, and Katie's parents live nearby too. But still, don't worry. I was a troublemaker back in the day, and I haven't done much for Mom, you know? I want to repay her. All right. Given what was said, Carlos couldn't really argue. In the end, with my mother-in-law's consent, my brother-in-law and his wife moved into her house. Today, I shared what happened with Carlos. Really? That's concerning. I'm not sure, but it makes me a little worried. Let's give Brett a call. After hearing my concerns, Carlos decided to call Brett. Hello? Carlos, what's up? Hey, it's been a while. Just checking in on you. I'm doing fine. After exchanging pleasantries, Carlos began to move the conversation forward. Calls usually led to discussions about how great things were between him and Katie, and this was no exception. Good to hear you're doing well. Yep, we're taking an extended vacation next week. What about Mom? Is she coming? Mom said we should just go, the two of us. Carlos and I exchanged looks. Given my mother-in-law's personality, this was no surprise. But we did notice Brett hesitating for a moment. In that case, let's have Mom stay with us during that time. What? At Carlos's words, Brett raised a surprised voice, and I looked up. Carlos, who smiled at me, nodded slightly and continued. We haven't seen Mom in a while, and I think Nikki will be thrilled. I'll get in touch with Mom. So it's settled. Hey, wait! Carlos cut off the call before Brett could finish. Carlos exhaled deeply and looked at me with a serious face. We had stumbled upon an opportunity to discuss my mother-in-law. Following that, Carlos promptly arranged the dates with Brett. I coordinated with my mother-in-law, and she agreed to stay with us for about a week. Granny's coming today? Yes, isn't it exciting? Yeah, Nikki loves Granny. Nikki was ecstatic that her grandmother would be staying over. A few days later, my mother-in-law arrived at our home with minimal luggage. As soon as she entered, she looked relieved and bowed her head. I'm sorry for intruding for a whole week. Don't worry about it. You're more than welcome. Nikki has been looking forward to this, so please make yourself at home. And so we spent a week together with my mother-in-law. However, I felt uneasy about my mother-in-law's actions from day one. Before her arrival, I cleaned up the home office I usually use for work to make space for her. When I showed her the room, she immediately said, Oh, you've prepared such a room for me. I feel bad. I'd be okay just with the corner. No worries. Please feel free to use the room. I only use it for work anyway. I convinced her to use it, but she still seemed apologetic. Also, with the kids off school today, I was planning to make lunch for the three of us when she said, Let me cook. Can I use the fridge? She kept insisting on doing household chores even though I wanted her to relax. Gratefully, I managed to get her to unwind in the living room by having Nikki play with Granny. Additionally, she would say things like, Oh, don't go through the trouble of snacks for me. I'm not worth it. Or, I'm fine with whatever is left over. Cold food is enough for me. As if she's an outsider rather than family. She used to be much more vibrant. It was painful to see her belittling herself like this. When Carlos came home while Nikki and mother-in-law were chatting, I filled him in on how she was acting. I see. Thanks for letting me know. I wish she would value herself more. Let's keep an eye on her. It's only the first day. Right. And just when it was getting late and we were about to go to sleep, my mother-in-law said, I guess I'll borrow this spot for a bit. Carlos and I were at a loss for words at her action. She was trying to lie down and sleep on the basement floor. Mom? Carlos was speechless. I said as calmly as possible, Mother-in-law, please consider this your room until you leave. Use a comforter so you don't catch a cold. But won't that be a bother? Absolutely not. We want you to be comfortable and enjoy your stay here. I looked her straight in the eye, trying to convey my sincerity. From her behavior, it was obvious what kind of life she's had with her own family. When I smiled warmly, mother-in-law's eyes filled with tears, and she finally broke down. It's been 10 years since I've slept in such a warm place. Thank you. What? My mind reeled from what I just heard. Carlos's voice was several octaves lower, filled with disbelief. Hey, Mom, tell us the truth. Are you getting along with Brett and the others? How's life been? Mother-in-law chuckled awkwardly before speaking. Well, getting along might be stretching it, but I have to make do, right? I mean, if they ditched me, I wouldn't know how to fend for myself at this age. Slowly, mother-in-law began to share the grim reality of her life with us. Turns out, it was much worse than we could have ever imagined. She was handling all the housework in that home. Whenever Katie was a little unhappy, she would raise her voice at her. All the shopping responsibilities were left to mother-in-law. She would buy whatever they needed. Moreover, mother-in-law was shouldering most of the living expenses. Clearly, her son-in-law and his wife had ulterior motives when suggesting they move in together, mainly to exploit mother-in-law's finances. Mother-in-law would only eat after the two of them were done, usually in the basement. The basement didn't even have heating, so she was freezing during the winter months. It's been a long time since I've had a meal like today's. I was always alone, you know. What? Are you serious? The reason mother-in-law wanted to sleep in the basement was that it had become the norm for her at her previous home. Both Carlos and I were at a loss for words. Initially, when Brett and Katie moved in, they were kind to her. At first, mother-in-law was happy and thought it was a good idea to live with them. However, as the years went by, their behavior changed drastically. Initially, Katie used to cook, and Brett would help with other chores. I'm so tired. Brett, you work so hard. Let me take care of things today. You should rest. Really? Thanks, Mom. That was probably the beginning. Mother-in-law, I'm really tired today. Oh, sorry, Katie. I have plans with the neighbors today. What? You're prioritizing them over me? Oh, I apologize. That's selfish of me. No, that's not it. Don't worry. I'll prepare dinner when I get back. This is my room, and this is Brett's room. Slowly but surely, they began to change how they treated mother-in-law, manipulating her more and more. Eventually, she found herself taking on almost all of the housework and contributing financially as well. Initially, she was using what used to be father-in-law's study as her room. It was a well-equipped space with a bed and other furnishings. She was delighted to be able to use such a cherished space as her own room. Even the study wasn't safe from Katie's reach. One day, Katie suggested, "Let's renovate this old study." Hold on, Katie. This is my husband's cherished study. Can we please leave it as is? I'm just thinking of your well-being, mother-in-law. Why do you have to make me look like the bad guy? I'm sorry, but I like it the way it is. Really? This room is outdated. It looks worthless. With that, Katie reached for a piece of glasswork. That was a music box made of glass, a favorite of my late father-in-law. He bought it during a trip they took together. It was something he treasured, but Katie deliberately dropped it. Oops, my bad. That wasn't on purpose. Oh. Wow, the glass is shattered everywhere. It's so dangerous. What a waste to keep this room the same, especially with all this junk. Please, don't touch anything else. Who do you think you're talking to? Fine, I'll leave the study alone, but from now on, you take care of everything in the house. And with all this junk, it's too dangerous for you to sleep here. You should sleep in the basement. What? Any complaints? In the end, mother-in-law agreed and had to sleep in the basement. I felt like passing out, hearing all these shocking stories. At the same time, I was angry with myself for not noticing sooner. I'm sorry, Mom. How could I have not realized? Don't blame yourself. I was hiding it too. Isn't it pathetic? The reason we never noticed was also because of a scheme by brother-in-law and his wife. Mother-in-law was only given a room when relatives gathered at her house. But the room was empty. No bed, no furniture. And if she dared to speak up, they threatened to demolish her study. They were only nice to her when people were around. We didn't notice because of that. If mother-in-law and I hadn't crossed paths that day, this might have continued even longer. The thought sends shivers down my spine. I always wanted to discuss this with you, but that study and that house are full of memories with my husband. Tears flowed freely from mother-in-law, and I couldn't stop my own. Our precious mother-in-law had endured this for over a decade. I can't even imagine how tough it's been for her. Why would her own family do this? They're not human! I shouted and hugged mother-in-law tightly. Darcy, I'm sorry. I need to step out for a bit. After we cried together, Carlos gently rubbed my back and spoke softly. Don't worry, Darcy and Mom. I'll handle this. Please take care of Mom, Darcy. I nodded quietly. Got it. Leave mother-in-law to me. Carlos. I hugged our concerned-looking mother-in-law again, stroking her back to comfort her. Then I turned to Carlos and said firmly, Go teach those awful people a lesson. Of course. Carlos chuckled and nodded, then left the house. Later, Carlos called to say he wouldn't be back until tomorrow evening. I shared the news with mother-in-law, and we all drank warm milk, trying to lighten the mood with some good stories. Nikki, who had heard the commotion, looked worried, joined us. I wanted to overwrite at least some of the bad memories. Usually, I'd remind Nikki not to stay up late, but since tomorrow was a day off, the three of us enjoyed chatting till we were content. All right, that's enough for today. Mother-in-law, would you like to go shopping with us tomorrow? Huh? We can buy whatever you want and eat delicious food. There's a cute dessert place that Nikki loves. Why don't we enjoy a relaxed day, just the three of us? At my words, mother-in-law's eyes filled with tears again. She nodded slowly, repeating, thank you, over and over. That night, we spread an air mattress in the living room and slept closely together, with mother-in-law in the middle. The next morning, mother-in-law greeted us with the same smile she often showed when father-in-law was alive. Good morning. And just as promised, we all had a fun shopping day. In the evening, we got a message from Carlos saying he had returned home, so we headed back as well. Before entering the house, I had one more thing to say to mother-in-law. Mother-in-law, we are on your side. Whatever is hurting you, just let it out here. We will always be by your side. And me too. I'm on Granny's side as well. Mother-in-law nodded silently to our words. Welcome home. Sorry for leaving the house to you. We're back. Everything okay? Yeah, no issues here. Carlos greeted us with a warm smile. I had Nikki and mother-in-law wait in my home office. Walking into the living room, my eyes widened at the sight of brother-in-law and his wife sitting on the floor. Their hands, resting on their knees, were trembling slightly. Upon seeing me, they greeted me in a soft voice, their faces filled with apprehension. What happened? My inner voice showed plainly on my face, which I turned to Carlos. Still smiling, he said, I haven't done anything yet. His use of yet made even me tense up, expecting something dramatic to happen. So, to cut to the chase, starting today, Mom will be living with us, Carlos continued. I felt relieved at those words. Carlos continued to speak to me as I nodded. So, Brett, do you fully grasp what you've put Mom through? And you too, Katie, do you understand what you've done to someone else's mother in their own home? I can't say it's entirely your fault. We didn't notice it either. but you have to take responsibility for your actions. After all, you're supposed to be mature adults. Carlos spoke vehemently. It was the first time I'd ever seen the unusually gentle and calm Carlos so angry. I honestly dislike bringing up work matters at home, but this time I'm speaking as Miss Christine's attorney, not as family. His voice was friendly but low and icy. My brother-in-law and his wife meekly responded, "Yes." And after several hours of discussion, numerous decisions were made. First, my brother-in-law and his wife would no longer be living with us. They would have to return all the money they had been extracting from mother-in-law, plus pay additional compensation. Having decided to respect mother-in-law's emotional attachment to her study and her own home, brother-in-law and his wife moved out. We banned them from ever setting foot in mother-in-law's home again. Upon hearing the decision, mother-in-law gave a troubled smile. "So we are family, right? Asking for damages is a bit much, don't you think?" "No, this is a gesture from our son Brett to Miss Christine, right?" Carlos's words left Brett nodding so fervently he looked like he might lose his head. Yes, I'm truly sorry for everything. Please accept this as our sentiment." Brett seemed so diminished that you'd wonder what on earth had happened. After the conversation, Carlos took a deep breath and turned to mother-in-law. "So please accept this, Mom. Let's put an end to this. Brett and his wife will never forget what they've done and make sure it doesn't happen again." Both of them nodded in silence. Seeing this, Carlos smiled gently and continued in a low voice. "Well, it will never happen again, right?" Yes, never again. Absolutely." So the conversation ended. Within a few months, we had received the damages that Carlos had arranged from the brother-in-law and his wife. Mother-in-law wanted to give it to us, saying it was because we had helped her, but we refused. She insisted, so we agreed to accept a little each month for groceries and let mother-in-law use the rest. "Carlos, what did you say to Brett and his wife?" I was curious about that day, so I asked him when we were alone. Carlos scratched his head, even though it wasn't itchy. "Don't lose faith in me, okay?" "Why would I? You helped mother-in-law and made them regret their actions." Actually, Carlos had contacted Brett immediately after hearing what had happened. "It's strange for me to say, but I rarely get angry. But when I do, people say I'm scary. I think I really scared them when I called. He told me where he was right away." Although a bit distant, he drove straight to the destination. Upon arriving, he immediately questioned the two. "I couldn't let it go, especially because he's my brother and I had trusted him with Mom." I didn't know the details, but considering how scared they both looked, Carlos must have been terrifying when angry. On their way out, they bowed deeply, saying, "We're really sorry." "Well, mother-in-law seems happy, and so does Nikki. I'm happy too. Thank you for standing up for us, Carlos. Darcy, I'll continue to do my best for our family." Even after everything, it's good to know we can still be a happy family. I'm grateful for my dependable husband and for mother-in-law who chose to rely on us. From now on, I intend to make up for the hardships by being a dutiful daughter-in-law and do my best in every way.
"Why aren't you eating dinner?" my father-in-law asked, who we were seeing for the first time in a long time for New Year's. He must have noticed that there was only enough food at the dining room table for 3. "It happens all the time." "What?" My father-in-law looked curiously across the table at my mother-in-law and husband. "What exactly do you mean by it happens all the time?" "A daughter-in-law who can't give her mother-in-law grandchildren would have to be a slave, wouldn't she?" While chewing on the hamburger steak I had made, my mother-in-law responded as if it were second nature. "That's right, Ruby is our slave. She stays in the kitchen to take care of us while we eat." My husband sipped his beer loudly and said this in the same tone as his mother, as expected. He took me to his mother's every weekend to help her with housework. Even though you couldn't give her grandchildren, I'm letting you stay here. You should appreciate her and do the best you can for my mom. I didn't want to go to my in-laws' house, but I had made a commitment. Even if I refused to go, my husband would verbally force me. He knows I have a short temper and difficulty finding my words. "Mom, I brought a slave." He even greeted me that way recently. "What are you talking about?" My father-in-law seemed offended by the way my mother-in-law and husband referred to me as a slave. "That's a normal family with children. Ruby's infertility took the possibility of grandchildren away from me." "Ruby, it's not your fault. You should stop bullying her." "What do you mean? You're the one that lives so far away, so stay out of the problem." "That's right, Dad. Don't tell me what to do. You didn't have to watch Mom lose the possibility of having grandchildren." In rebuttal, my mother-in-law and my husband sounded like they were mocking my father-in-law. I tossed the coffee beans in the grinder while listening to their conversation. My mother-in-law and husband always ordered me to bring them coffee as soon as they finished eating. I was so busy with shopping for my mother-in-law that I only had time to eat a piece of sweetbread earlier. Come on, I'm hungry too. I'm not sure what I'm doing. As if escaping from the grinder's blade, a single coffee bean fell to the floor. My name is Ruby, and I'm a 37-year-old housewife. During the weekday lunch hours, I work part-time in the kitchen of a family restaurant. My husband and I rent an apartment. I used to work at the same local bank as my husband, but I left 3 years ago. I quit to focus on fertility treatment. We were unable to have children, so we sought medical attention and were told that the problem was on my side. After a year of treatment, I was told that it is impossible for me to get pregnant. My mother-in-law and husband changed shortly after that. Originally, we were both working and managing our own income and budgets. When I quit my job, my husband was responsible for my living expenses. He took over our savings and the bills for rent and insurance, and he started giving me money for living expenses. At first, we were able to live comfortably on $1,000 a month. However, "Since we don't have fertility treatments anymore, you can save money." These were the first words out of my husband's mouth when we decided to give up on trying to conceive. What? "Because of the financial burden of the treatment, I've been giving you more money for living expenses, but you don't need it anymore. You can go back to work if you want." True to his word, he cut back and gave me $800, then $600, even $500 a month. Of course, there was a time when I was desperately trying to find work. My mother-in-law, of all people, got in the way of that. "Working as a full-time employee is not good for a wife. She will tell you that if you don't share the housework, she will divorce you." "So you're saying I shouldn't work?" "Of course, if it's only part-time, then fine. You need to devote yourself to Carl and serve me. You can't even have grandchildren, so it's the least you can do." Is it really so bad that I can't have children? Despite going through painful treatments, I was unable to have a child. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, changed her mind about me. "My bathroom is filthy, so please come and clean it. Drive me because I'm going out to dinner with a friend." She frequently called and asked me to run errands. To top it all off, I worked every weekend at my in-laws' house. Plus, no matter what I did, all she did was complain. "Why are you folding laundry like that? Why not put the corners together and fold it correctly and neatly? Do it again." My mother-in-law once threw the folded laundry onto the floor. She seemed to enjoy hurting me. "I'm going out for a drink. Do you want to join me?" my father-in-law asked after dinner. "If you don't want to, you don't need to. I was just thinking about what happened during dinner. You've been treated so badly by Elizabeth and Carl." His words pulled on my heart. I automatically started to cry. "I saw that, and if you want, you can vent to me." My father-in-law took me to a local bar. It was small, but clean and cozy. We sat at a table across from each other. He ordered a beer, and I ordered a whiskey soda. We ordered mixed nuts and a salad. At the dinner table, I could tell Elizabeth and Carl were being rude to you. My father-in-law began to speak after taking a sip of beer. I've been treated badly since I gave up fertility treatment. My father-in-law listened to me tell him about how his wife and son have treated me. I'm blamed for not being able to have children and am forced to run errands. I told him my husband wouldn't let me work full-time. He's reduced my living expenses after stopping fertility treatments, and now he only gives me $500 a month. What I hate most is being called a slave. Elizabeth is not happy unless she gets her way. Yeah, I know. She wasn't like this before, but she became selfish after having Carl. She would yell at me so much that I began to dislike her, and now we pretend to be a happy couple. Do you think it's because he doesn't want to be with me? I'm jealous my father-in-law has a place to escape to. You're not tough enough to make yourself heard. Yeah, but venting to you makes me feel better. Good, that makes me happy. Before leaving the restaurant, my father-in-law and I had one more beer and one more whiskey soda. However, a situation came up right after that. I'm back. My mother-in-law and husband were standing there when I opened the door. Dad, did you have a night out with my wife? My husband says this while looking at both of us. What? I just invited Ruby for a drink. What kind of relationship is this that you can go out for drinks together? My mother-in-law looked mad. What kind of, just like your husband said. What are you thinking, Ruby? Isn't it wrong for a wife to go to a bar with a man? You can't give me grandchildren, but you still have desires. My husband and mother-in-law both pointed at me. Enough! A powerful voice echoed throughout the area as if thunder had struck. My father-in-law was enraged, staring at Carl and Elizabeth. He blew up. What is it with you? Desire? All I wanted was for Ruby to relax. The rage sped up my heart rate. Mild-mannered people can become more difficult to deal with when angered. Elizabeth. When she heard her name called, my mother-in-law shuddered. She must be scared of him. Or maybe she had something to hide. You said, what kind of relationship do you have with your father-in-law that you go out drinking together? That's, my daughter-in-law is treated like a slave, and I took her to get her mind off it. That's what happened. Because of Ruby, I can't have grandchildren. How can you say that when you hate children? What? Those words made me want to yell. My mother-in-law always blamed me for not giving her grandkids. Well, grandchildren are different than other children, aren't they? That said, I don't think you wanted grandchildren enough to treat Ruby like this. You're just making an excuse to point the finger at her. My mother-in-law looked like she was about to say something to my father-in-law, but quickly averted her gaze. Did she have nothing to say back? Or was she afraid of her husband? Carl. Wait, what? I heard you only give Ruby $500 a month for living expenses. Do you keep the rest of your salary? No, I pay rent and insurance. Even so, I don't think that's all of your salary. My husband turned his head and bit his lower lip. He couldn't think of a quick excuse. I came here to discuss our future. Let's get right to it. My father-in-law led us to the living room. What do you mean, discuss our future? Just sit down. Make some coffee first, Ruby. Don't tell her what to do. My father-in-law yelled, and my mother-in-law shuddered again. Make coffee for us, and a cup for Ruby, too. My mother-in-law nodded and sat meekly in her chair. My husband took a seat beside her. I sat on a chair further away from the table. I'll be retired in a few years. After my current assignment ends, I won't be living with you anymore. My father-in-law, still standing, started to speak. What? What exactly do you mean? Elizabeth and Carl's voices overlapped. Mr. Murphy looked at both of them. We've been masquerading as a couple for years, so we no longer need to live together. I'll live where I want, and you can stay here. That's fine, but I changed my mind after you accused me of being unfaithful earlier. I'm selling the house. Elizabeth, I'll leave you. No, where am I going to live? My mother-in-law, as expected, was surprised and stood up. Why don't you just get a place to live? How am I going to do that? I can't pay the rent. Get Carl to help you. He only gives her $500 a month. I'm sure he can pay for you. That's not possible. When asked to handle things financially, Carl stood up and waved his hands. He must have been nervous because he was wobbling. We don't have any money. If I do that, I won't be able to pay Mom's debt. Elizabeth gasped. My husband swallowed his words. But I for sure heard that Elizabeth has debt. Was she in debt? You just mentioned debt, didn't you? My father-in-law exclaimed, even more horrified. Elizabeth and Carl, what exactly do you mean by debt? Explain. I didn't mean what I said. I said explain. My mother-in-law burst into tears when she heard her husband's angry voice. But his rage didn't fade. Mom owes me $50,000. I'm her co-signer. With a resigned expression on his face, my husband began to speak. Around the time we stopped fertility treatment, Mom made an investment. She made some money at first, but the stock market crashed. You mean you lost money in the stock market and went into debt? I used family funds. At the time, we were put onto stocks that would go up, but eventually we got into debt. But now I'm paying it with my salary, and Mama's repaying it by working part-time at a supermarket. This was news to me. I had never heard anything about any stocks or debt. My mother-in-law had lost a lot of money in the stock market and had borrowed money to make up for it when I stopped fertility treatment. She must have tried to pay back the debt by buying stocks that were supposed to go up. But as they were both repaying debt, that stock didn't go up either. Maybe, I couldn't help but say the first thing that popped into my mind. That's also when you and Carl began treating me like a slave. Ruby, what are you trying to say? Were you just taking it out on me? The slave treatment started around the time I stopped fertility treatments. I doubt that it's because she wanted a grandchild so badly, but the simple answer is that she was taking it out on me because that was satisfying. My mother-in-law stayed silent as expected. And Carl used the money that he took out of my monthly expenses to pay off his debts. He can save money because there's no fertility treatment. He didn't give me less money for some strange unknown reason. He just needed the money to repay his mom's debt. You stupid idiot! Finally, my father-in-law blew up. Even if it's family money, it's money I worked for and saved. You put it in stocks without consulting me. To top it all off, you lost it. What the hell kind of money are you spending? After saying this, my father-in-law suddenly left the room as if he had thought of something. He looked like he was going to the second floor. We all followed him. What are you doing, Dad? Show me Elizabeth's stuff. I'll check what she's buying. Stop! She cried and screamed, but her husband didn't care. Stop it! Her husband opened the closet door as she yelled. The first thing that caught my eye was a luxury handbag. With just a quick glance, you could see at least 10 of them. Ruby, are these bags expensive? They're all luxury items, costing over $1,000. My father-in-law opened a small drawer in the corner of the closet. There was an array of accessories, rings, necklaces, and earrings. Some of them had diamonds, rubies, and other precious stones on them. I picked up the ring and looked at the inside. I found an engraving of K18, indicating it was made of 18-karat gold. Elizabeth, you bought all these expensive things without telling me? I'm sorry, but... Divorce! My father-in-law turned his eyes on my husband in disgust and he snapped. All this spending, investing in stocks without my permission, and treating Ruby like a slave? Divorce! I want a divorce. I won't take no for an answer. Then how am I supposed to live? Talk to Carl. I'll sell this house and land immediately. You can sell these bags and jewelry to pay for the move. My mother-in-law couldn't say anything back. My husband was nodding his head and biting his lip. He no longer had the arrogant and domineering demeanor that he had when he treated me like a slave, like it was a lie. The next day, my father-in-law got 2 sets of divorce papers. Here, Ruby, if you want to file for divorce too. My father-in-law said as he handed one to me. I looked at my husband, and he sighed and looked away from me. Of course I want a divorce, but more importantly, we want alimony from these people. I thought hard about this all night last night. How have I been suffering for so long? What do I want to do now? I really wanted to have a child. The fertility treatment was agonizing, but I endured it. But then I realized that I couldn't conceive. I continued my story, holding back the tears in my eyes. All the painful tests and treatments I went through to become a mother were all for nothing. I can't have a baby no matter how I try. As I was grieving, Carl told me that since I didn't need fertility treatment, he would reduce my living expenses. What? Are you saying this is all Carl's fault? Shut up, Elizabeth. My father-in-law was horrified, and my mother-in-law immediately stopped talking. My mother-in-law blamed me for not giving her a grandchild, and then she treated me like a slave. Do you know how hard it was for me? Naturally, there was no way Elizabeth or Carl would respond. But in the end, Carl just needed money to pay off his debts. For Elizabeth, it was just an outlet for the stress of losing so much money in the stock market. I want you to reimburse me for this. What if I say I won't pay? Sure, I'll talk to my lawyer. My husband put his palm to his forehead and fell silent. After the new year, my father-in-law officially divorced my mother-in-law. When he put his house on the market, he found a buyer within a few days. Someone was just looking for land to build a house in that area, so they decided to tear down the old house and clear the land before selling it. Having no place to stay, my mother-in-law moved into a rundown apartment that looked like it would cave in from a gentle breeze. She now lives with my ex-husband. In addition to their living costs, they have to pay off their debt and alimony to me, which I'm sure is very difficult for them financially. My mother-in-law is working at a supermarket during the day and a part-time job at a pub at night. My husband also works a second job on the weekends at a wedding hall in addition to his company job. They complain to everyone around them that it's hard to pay their debt and alimony while watching others become happy. Meanwhile, I moved into a beautiful little apartment and got a job through my father-in-law. It was a clerical job at a security company. He said I could use my knowledge of accounting and my skills from working at a bank. I want you to be happy. If you ever need help, just tell me anything. My father-in-law is on my side, and I will do my best in this new chapter to reassure him. And this time, I will shine on my own. The morning of my first day at work, I put on a new suit and made a promise to myself.